Sometimes the story we tell ourselves is not really true. Sometimes the story others tell about us is not really true. Here on today's Heartlift with Janelle, we are going to learn how to rewrite our story. So pick up your favorite pen and journal, grab a cup of something delicious, and start your heart-lifting journey towards living a meaningful life.
Hello and welcome to today's Heart Lift. We are in for a treat today, my dear Heartlifters. We have Miss Amy Julia Becker, and we are going to be talking about her just hot off the press, newly launched To Be Made Well, an invitation to wholeness, healing, and hope. And Amy hosts the Love is Stronger Than Fear podcast. And Amy Julia, as of 2.5 weeks ago, when I had a serious encounter with Jesus at 3 a.m. in the morning from 1 John 4, 7 through 21, where he says, perfect love casts out all fear. I don't think I understood what it meant to be loved by God. And I've been walking with him for over 4 decades. So I cannot wait to hear more of your story. And I can't wait to tune in to find out more about Love is Stronger Than Fear. I need it. Welcome. Welcome,
thank
Amy
you.
Julia.
It's great to be here. I'm really delighted to be talking with you today.
Your book just came out. Give us, how was launch day for you? I am an author, and my listeners just are, so many want to be authors or are authors. And so I always try to hold the journey of becoming and being an author in hand with what we talk about too. So how was launch day for you?
You know, it was great. So this, many months ago, we realized that we were planning a spring break trip as a family over the same week as the book launch. And my husband and I were like, I'm not sure that's going to work.
Wow.
But we have 3 kids, and 2 of them had 2 weeks off in March. 1 did not have any time off.
Where do you live? Sorry?
Sorry, say that again.
What area?
We live in Connecticut.
That's right. I just read that. Oh my gosh. I can't believe I just asked you that.
Our oldest daughter had 2 half days last week. So we decided that my husband would go to Florida early with the 2 who were off. And then on Tuesday, the book launched and Penny went to school, and I did like a slew of interviews, and I packed up and I picked her up from school, and we flew to Orlando and we went to Disney World, which seemed so appropriate. Like, what do you do when you publish your book? I'm going to Disney World.
You won the Super Bowl. That's amazing.
Yes, pretty much. So
now that, my friend, I think is one heck of a way to launch a book.
It really was. I mean, it was not actually by design, but it worked out great.
That is so amazing. How old are your children, just for the audience?
Yeah. So Penny is 16. William is 13, and Marilee's 11.
What is your secret to the fountain of youth?
Oh, gosh. I don't know.
That is not flattery. That is really truth. I was not expecting you to say that. Wow. That's amazing. I love it. How were yours? I launched my first book when my twins were 14, 15. Yeah.
So
many moons ago.
Yeah. So my first book, it's called A Good and Perfect Gift, came out in 2011. So Penny was 5. And then Marilee was an infant. I mean, yeah. Mm-hmm. So, and then I wrote it. I mean, each one takes a long time, probably in general, but especially and then there was one that came out in 2014. So, you know, they were kind of whatever that would be, 8, 4, 1 or something. Yeah. No, Marilee was older than that. Anyway, and then
no need to do math.
Came out in 2018. Yeah, I'm a writer.
I know. I say the same thing.
Yeah, and then this one. So, you know, every 3 to 4 years, a book is able to emerge in the midst of this family situation.
I love that you are continuing to do that alongside of being a mother. I think it emulates a beautiful picture for all 3 of your children.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's fun. They I think really appreciate, like, they're glad that I have this vocation, and I think it feels special to them that I get to write books.
Yeah. Why this book? Why To Be Made Well? What a beautiful name. Every good, that one is just so amazing.
Thank you.
But To Be Made Well, what a beautiful, beautiful name.
Yeah. It's funny. We originally wanted the book to be called Made Well, but there's a clothing brand.
There is. I was just going to say, I have ordered from that company.
But I'm actually really glad because it did shift it to Be Made Well, which allows for a lot, like there's a resonance from a story in the Bible when Jesus says, do you want to be made well? Like it's a question that Jesus
it's one of my favorite questions.
Yeah. Right. So I think there's that resonance. And then there's also this sense of what does it mean to be made well? Right. Like, and have we been made well? And are we being made well? I mean, there's a lot that
there's a journey in it, because the word be is twofold to me. It's active, but yet it's who we should, we just need to be.
Yeah.
So I love it so much. Why that book right now in your life?
So in some ways, this book has been in the making, for many, many years, whether that is tracing back to even an experience in high school that I write about in the introduction, where I had a paralyzed stomach.
How on earth? Share with everyone. Right. I have a paralyzed esophagus. It does not work anymore. It's called achalasia. So when I read that, I went, oh, please don't. No. One paralyzed organ is enough.
Right. Well,
how does that happen?
Is no longer paralyzed. So
praise be to God.
It was not a permanent condition, although it was true for years. And really there's no medical explanation. It might be that I got a virus that prompted a shutdown, but I think there was more of a mental and emotional component to it, where I think I really didn't know how to feel. I knew how to do, and I knew how to perform and achieve, and I didn't know how to feel. And I think I internalized all of these feelings that I didn't know how to feel. And then my body shut down. that's what I think happened.
Oh, I could not agree with you more.
And then I also think there was a physiological aspect to that, because I did find years later a journal where I had written, I pledged to myself that I will only eat X number of calories per day. And I was really living on like a subsistence diet. If you look at what they say, you can survive on this, but you're not, your metabolism is just going to slow down. So I think my body was actually doing some self-protection by not processing food. And yet that was ultimately a really scary thing. But then because of where I was psychologically, I wasn't really that upset that I had a paralyzed stomach. It was kind of like,
I get it.
Okay. Well, that's easier than having to watch what I eat, because anything I ate sat in my stomach and then essentially came back up. But it wasn't, to be a little bit too graphic about this, there was no stomach acid. So it was regurgitated food. It wasn't vomit in the sense of
it couldn't process. Right.
Right. It couldn't process.
Couldn't break down.
Yes. So that experience over the course of many years was an early opportunity for me to think about what it means to live, not just in a body, but a body that is connected to mind, emotion, spirit. So kind of put that on a shelf. That was not something I was going to write a whole book about, but it was definitely the beginnings of this book, if I look back on it now. And
when did the vowing, promising, writing in your journal? So at 6, what age were you at that point?
15.
Okay.
Yeah, 15.
That's just peer pressure, or?
I think there's a combination of things where certainly I was in a social environment where I had lots of friends with eating disorders, and I was very conscious of, kind of going through puberty, my body changing, and had a real perfectionistic sense of what should not change, which is to say the number on that scale. And so there was that. I also was at boarding school, so I was away from home, which on the one hand meant that I had a lot more control over what I was eating. I didn't have anyone saying, really? An apple for dinner?
Right.
Something wrong here.
Right.
But my dad was a compulsive exerciser and he ate a lot of calories, but he only ate dinner. So there was definitely some home stuff where it was a
little dysmorphic, right?
Yes. So there was a lot of different, I think,
so you
factors.
Watched that. In other words, one thing we say here in our community is more is caught than taught. And I'm a huge pound the table over the atmosphere, the emotional, mental, relational, spiritual atmosphere in which we are reared.
Yeah.
You know, and how much we just soak in subconsciously.
Totally.
Okay.
So I think
Thank you for sharing.
Soak in some physical stuff, but also that emotional piece of like, and if I'm feeling sad or angry or hurt, I didn't even have that language, much less the ability to express that. And so I think all of those things together really combined in such a way that I ended up with what was both a physiological paralysis and a psychological eating disorder. And it was really hard to, they were inseparable.
So, yeah.
But I tried to separate them. And so
sure.
that's part of why the healing, took a long time. But then in terms of this book, I mean, again, it was about 7 years ago, I was experiencing just consistent lower back pain in such a way that every night I would wake up in the middle of the night and take an Advil. And every day I didn't take Advil during the day, but I would be like, oh, I can't pick you up. No, you can't sit in my lap. I don't think I can lift that. Like it was impeding my life. And I thought, what is going on? I do not want to live like this. And so I tried all sorts of different things and ended up having an experience with a yoga teacher where we sat down face to face, cross-legged, which did not feel good to my back or my tailbone, which had also started to hurt. And I told her, I think there's something that is out of alignment in my body. So I thought yoga might be able to help. And she said, anytime I hear the word alignment, I think about your life and not about your body.
Wow.
And I started talking and we never moved. I mean, we did not move for an hour. I just talked
I believe it.
feeling like I was losing my identity and I couldn't keep up with actually any writing work because I had these 3 children and my husband had a big job and I was just like losing myself. And over the course of that hour of talking, my back, it was a freedom. It was a healing. But I was very confused as a Christian.
Yes.
I was confused for a couple reasons. Like,
thank you for your honesty. I can't.
As a Christian, I was like, "What just happened?" Because
exactly.
I talked to this person who was a yoga teacher.
A yoga teacher.
Yoga, like, what's going on? And then also, I was confused because I was like, "But I'm not any better. My life is still a mess." Like, I said that to her, and she said, for healing to happen, you don't need to figure everything out, but you do need to acknowledge the source of the pain. So
say that one more time, man. That's a lean in. That's a lean in.
Everything out, but you do need to acknowledge the source of the pain. And that was just that word of truth to me that led me on a healing path that for me led me back to Jesus and to saying, wait a second. I've so often treated the healing stories in the Gospels as a way to understand Jesus's power, Jesus's compassion, what it means for, how love works. But I've essentially thought those happened back then because now we have antibiotics. And I really wanted to ask the question, is there more going on here in terms of both?
What a great question.
Connection of mind, body, spirit, the connection that the restoration and healing God wants us to have within ourselves, with God, with other people. And so that really was, that was 7 years ago. And that led me on a personal journey that eventually led into this book.
Wow. Before we hit record, which is when some of the best happens.
Yeah.
You had mentioned that in high school, you had gone to a Young Life camp at that time was that during the paralysis of your stomach, that whole season? Okay. I'd love for you to share that.
Let's see. So after my freshman year in high school, when I was still, more or less healthy, I had gone to Saranac for a Young Life camp. And it had been fine. It had been fun. I was a church going-ish kid and thought this is great. And then it was my sophomore year where I had been hospitalized and my paralyzed stomach. And I was in a desperate place where I just thought I need to know whether God is actually real and if God actually cares about me, because I was really, really sick and
I'm not doing well.
Everything in my life was being taken away from me. So I went back to that Young Life camp in I literally was only drinking cans of Ensure. That was the only nutrition I was getting because everything else was coming out of my body. So it's like, this is not good. And I had a profound experience in which I really felt like I had an encounter with the Holy Spirit. And what's interesting is looking back on that, my stomach did not change. Like I did not get better in a physical or emotional way for a long time. But I did begin a relationship with Jesus that was personal and real and life-changing. And ultimately, I believe, was what led me to that deeper healing. Right. And so those things really did intertwine. And for me, it was an experience of deep need that led me to say, God, I need you. Right. And if you're real, I need you. And I will do whatever it takes to be a part of the work that you're doing in my life and around me. And that was, 30 years ago. And here I am.
Wow. Can I ask or is it may I ask? I always get can and may mixed up. I think it's may I don't know. But anyway, what surrounded you in that period of time? Like, how did your parents respond? How did peers respond? Teachers? Did you go to therapy?
Yeah. So I will say my best friend at the time is a woman named her last name now is Feliciano. So Nero Feliciano. And she's a psychotherapist now, and she just read, To Be Made Well. And we've been talking about it. She's got her own book coming out soon. Like, anyway, we're both people of faith, et cetera. And she was like, AJ, I did not know any of this. And you were my best friend. So I definitely kept a lot inside. So I want to say that as because, and I knew, Nero to this day, she's a therapist because she's always been the person you go to when you need to talk about something.
A safe person.
Right. Like, and she was absolutely safe at the time. And apparently I still was not talking to her about any of this. My parents, I would say, again, have some emotional maturing that maybe didn't happen. And it was hard to therefore deal with a daughter. And I have 3 younger siblings. My dad.
You're the oldest?
I'm the oldest of 4 girls.
Oh my.
Yeah. My dad, we lived in Connecticut, but my dad worked in Manhattan. And so my dad, when I say compulsive exercising, he exercised for about an hour twice a day, 7 days a week. And so there was just a sense of not only was I seeing the compulsive exercising, but also he was not very present because he also worked in Manhattan and commuted. So, right. And then I went to boarding school, so there was just not a tremendous amount of emotional support. And I think I had been taught that I wasn't supposed to need that.
Yes. I was going to ask that.
True, both culturally and in my family. So
sounds like it was like the incubator of high functioning.
Yeah. So I was high functioning the whole time.
I think that's so it's a side project for me when I finally raced to my PhD, because I have seen so many, myself included, who are so high functioning. That's not an ego thing. That's just a type push thing. I don't even know what that is. It's like, that's what I'd love to wrestle with. Yeah. It's like, but that's how you were shaped and formed, probably was in your DNA, firstborn, la, 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 la. But then it goes to the very, very unhealthy side. Right. And you don't give yourself permission to be real or average.
Be needy.
Or be needy.
I felt like honestly, I feel like the support I got was from the Lord in that time.
Wow.
And I'm really grateful for that. But even I remember being kind of taken to see therapists, which again, if I look back on it, I'm like, my parents did not resist that. And yet they also weren't like, I'm sure this will help. So I saw a lot of therapists once or twice. And then I would be like, yeah, it's not helping.
I hear that. Yeah. I see that a lot. Yes.
And I remember feeling really protective of my family in those sessions where I was like, why are you asking me those questions about my dad? So it was very much like, no, we're not going.
You feel dishonoring. I'm women my age in the 60s and 70s. That's still to this day. Are like, I knew she was a good mom. And I'm like, this is not a question of love.
Right.
It really isn't. But it's so difficult.
Yeah.
Because we so want to honor our parents. no matter what.
I really wanted and thought that my worth came from being perfect. I really did. So, throughout this time, once my weight was stable enough that I didn't need to be in the hospital,
Thank God.
I just started telling people, because people asked all the time, like, are you still sick? Is everything okay? And I literally be like, I still throw up occasionally, but my weight is stable. Everything is fine. And it's like, by occasionally, I mean every meal. So it's like, I'm not fine at all. I'm terrible. But
right. But you would never have given yourself permission to do that, I would assume.
I also think that this is, I'm sure, true for many people you talk with. Healing usually feels worse at first. It's like
awful.
You got to strip it all down, and you got to deal with all the infection and dig it out, and it's painful and it's gross, and
hard conversations and boundaries and yes, ma'am. Yes.
I think there was also a part of me that was like, this isn't working all that well, but it is better than having to deal, so.
Oh, Heartlifters, I want you to hear that, because I preach that all the time. Yes, it's so hard. It is not easy, but it is empowering. But you have to make sure you have the proper support, underneath you. And I know in high school at 15, 16, I certainly did not.
Yeah.
So, and I'm a heck of a lot older than you, but there still is that barrier, as you talk about, in to be made well, barriers with mental health and emotional health, and relating that as being a follower of Jesus. Would you agree or disagree with that? And you do not have to answer.
Yeah. Oh, I do think so. I think there are a couple different ways that we can think that all we need is prayer, and that there's something wrong with us if by praying we're not getting kind of the solution,
Yes.
Or that like healing is a matter of having enough faith. I mean, that was something in writing this book.
That's huge.
It was so good for me to recognize that, like, there's that passage where Jesus is in the boat and there's the storm, and they come to him and they say, don't you care if we drown? And he calms the storm. And then he says, oh, you have little faith. It's like, okay, they had little faith and he calmed the storm. Like their faith is not what prompted the action on Jesus's part.
Thank you.
So it's like there are a lot of
everyone take a big sigh of relief.
Yeah. And I really think, even from a medical perspective, there's a lot of times where we need to basically be able to interrupt a destructive cycle. And I think that both antidepressants and medication, like physical, like painkillers, can interrupt. But really, if that's what we keep doing in our society, is we just keep the interruption going instead of saying, no, the interruption is so that you can do the healing work. So I think that, and actually, honestly, even therapy can be a good interruption.
I agree. 100%.
Keep going back to therapy, and don't do that deeper healing work.
Yeah, you want the therapist to do the work for you.
Right. And so, and you want Advil to do the work for you.
You do. Or Prozac. I take an antidepressant. I'm not ashamed to say it, but I did it. I know in my super spiritual state back in my 30s and 40s, I was so like Bible teacher and, I can't, no, you can't take it. I mean, absolutely. Like you just didn't do that in my denomination. And so, I really did everything I could. And then in a very serious situation, I thought, I'm not going to get through this one.
Right.
And I'd had doctors since I was 16 telling me, I can remember at the Naval Hospital, my parents were in the service. You need, an antidepressant. And I was like, I don't need that. I mean, it was just, obviously they saw something I didn't see. But I do remember, and in my work today as well, try to do what is possible.
Right.
But like you said, to come alongside and give your body, like mine, serotonin,
right,
that needed it to be able to do the work.
Right.
Right.
Exactly.
Right. Yes. So faith and mental health, that is something that we definitely cherish and want to talk more about. You give us, Amy Julia, AJ, that's so adorable. You give us 4 barriers to healing in this book. And I am so excited to talk about them. So barrier of distraction, the barrier of shame, the barrier of anxiety, the barrier of status.
Yeah.
So can you just give us a little morsel from each?
Yeah, will do. So the barrier of distraction is that surface level, whether it is the entertainment by scrolling through any social media app, the distraction of just productivity, of getting things done. Like, what's the next thing on the list? I'm just going to keep going, or the distraction, whether it's of like shopping or drinking wine or watching television, right? Like all of those things can keep us on the surface of our lives. And they are not necessarily bad in and of themselves, but when they keep us from paying any attention to the deeper work that God often wants to do, then they can be a barrier to healing. Often, I think the reason we distract ourselves as much as we do is so that we don't experience a sense of shame. Because usually, I think what we have to identify pretty early on in a healing process is the places where we feel shame. And for most of us, that comes out as a not enough. I'm not good enough in this area. I'm not I'm not a good enough parent. I'm not a good enough worker. I'm not a good enough, exerciser or whatever it is.
Yes.
Right? I'm just not
a good enough church member, a good enough
parishioner. I'm not a good enough Christian. Absolutely.
Good enough Christian. Right.
And so that's where I think shame can keep us from healing, because we're so afraid of actually experiencing those feelings. And we're afraid that God actually doesn't want to heal us, because if these things are true, then I don't know that I get healing, right? Then the next barrier would be anxiety, which I believe for many of us fuels a lot of our activity in the world, where there's a sense of I keep going in order to prove myself. And I'm afraid that if I stop, if I pay attention to pain, if I ask for help, if I admit my need, then again, what if love is not real? What if it's not for me? What if healing's not possible for me, right? There's a lot of fear there that can actually be a barrier to healing. And then finally, status is this sense that, especially for those of us who are in a higher socioeconomic position within our society, or what's considered higher in our society, there is a degree of both pride and a sense that I am what I do. And so my achievements make me who I am, and my status makes me who I am. And if I believe that about myself, then I am never going to surrender to the healing that God has for me. And I'm never going to recognize the need I have for other people. So all of those things, I think, are barriers to healing. The one thing I'll say before we maybe talk more about them is that none of them are barriers that are big enough for God not to be present in them and able to work, even when they're very present with us. So it's not as though I need to become someone who's like really good at attending and, I'm conquered my shame and my fear and I'm so humble now. Like it's not like we got to go through all that in order for Jesus to be present and want to heal us. But I think it can be really helpful, nevertheless, to actually name those different barriers and recognize how they might be operating in our own lives to help us avoid, ignore, or distract ourselves from the very real pain that I think most of us are experiencing, both personally and on a social level.
Why do you think we do that? And you are a Princeton graduate, theological seminary graduate. Well, I'm so curious. I know that I have read it, but just remind everyone what your degree was in.
So undergrad, I was an English major with an African-American studies minor. So literature, essentially.
I love it.
Yeah. And then I got an MDiv, Master's of Divinity from Princeton Seminary, where again, actually, I wrote my thesis on Flannery O'Connor. So again, literary minded in both cases, but that was, really just, my favorite aspect of the MDiv was the biblical studies part.
What was your take on that? Like what?
I was looking actually at Flannery O'Connor's theology of disability. So how does she incorporate characters with disabilities, and what is she trying to say about grace, about God, about humans? Yeah. So it was really fun to work on.
Is that a future book?
Every so often I think about returning to it, and I haven't. I don't know.
Was there, I'm just so curious, was there a reason you looked at the disability aspect, or was that just?
Yeah. So our oldest daughter, Penny, has Down syndrome. And so I have been particularly interested in disability and theology really since she was born. So that's now 16 years ago. And and so for whatever reason, I guess I just was reminded of Flannery O'Connor somewhere along the way in seminary. And I thought, no one's really written about this. And that would be interesting to explore. So
fascinating. Yeah, that would be such a great read. I would enjoy that so much. In your own journey, then, what do you think was it all the above that you've already told me? The avoidance of the pain, was it just ignorance? I would say, not knowing in the beginning, you didn't have an emotional intelligence.
Yeah. Right.
But as you grew and developed, I would guess your hunger for studying that and understanding what was going on in your own self.
Yeah, I think there are two things. Like, I am really convinced that our American culture, Western American culture, really communicates to us that we are what we do. And so there's a sense of achievement is what makes you who you are. And I have been given, in terms of my body and mind and like socioeconomic position, and even my like faith, right? Like, I have been given a lot that allows me to look like I am achieving the way I'm supposed to be.
I'm so thankful. You're so honest, Amy Julia. This is such a conversation that needs to be brought.
Well, thanks. Forth. And then I think, when I look back at myself as a high school kid, it's like I had all the achievements, right? Like, I'm going to Princeton University and I can't keep food in my stomach. I mean, this is not
Where's the disconnect?
There's nothing going well.
This is not going well. Yes, that is so right. There's such a dissonance. I mean,
and yet for me, that sense of, for me to lay down my achievements as my place, like the way I receive worth and value, was truly like, well, what will exist, right? What's there? And
who am I?
It's just an incredibly long process of coming to believe that God's love for me is not conditional, which we say all the time, but like actually believing that.
We believe it here in the head.
It is, but it is foundational, right? It's not conditional, but it is foundational. And if I'm going to, and so it's so interesting, because if I believe that I'm beloved, doing can come out of that. I mean, it's not as though I'm beloved and that means that I should be passive for the rest of my life. It's like, no, like that's where you're achieving, so to speak, but like your doing can come out of that being.
Yes.
But if you think that your doing is what creates your being, then you're going to be really messed up. And I think that's where a lot of us are. And I think
that's well said.
We need, the other thing I will say is I believe that God's healing. Henry Nouwen has a beautiful book called Life of the Beloved. And in it, he writes about bringing our brokenness under the blessing of God, believing that our brokenness is even a part of our belovedness, as opposed to over here, I need to get healed and then I will be God's beloved.
Yes.
Rather like, no, like, and you don't even know your brokenness, that's going to be a part of God's healing for you and for the world. And so there's just a deep trust in the healing love of God that I think is like really hard for certainly Americans. I don't know about the rest of the world, but to believe. But if we can surrender to belovedness, I think there's a tremendous amount of healing that can happen.
It's just amazing that you said that. It is just an engaging conversation about the scripture. I am accepted in the beloved. It was where my healing journey started in my 20s. And I didn't understand what that meant at all. but I was trying to deal with roots of rejection in my life. And so I went to the scripture and I thought, what's the difference of rejection? And I looked up in the old Strong Concordance and found acceptance and went with that. Is that a part, like in the very beginning of the book, in part 1, you have the nature of healing, restored to self?
Yeah.
Is that what you're referring to here, that we truly need to be restored? What does that even mean? Because that self word, Amy Julia, in the Christian tradition is still not a really beloved word.
Yeah. I mean, what comes to mind immediately is love your neighbor as you love yourself. If we don't know how to love ourselves, which I really think means if we don't know how to receive the love God has for us, then we will not know how to love in return. But in terms of what I mean by being restored to self, there are really 2 components to that. One is the mind, body, spirit connection, because we've bifurcated them, like we've divided them into different parts of ourselves instead of recognizing an integrated whole.
Right.
But also being, I'm looking in To Be Made Well at the story of the woman who has been bleeding for 12 years and how her healing is not complete when her bleeding stops. In fact, it's like that's like almost the icing on the cake, right? Jesus is like, you need to come in front of me. And she's afraid and she doesn't know why. Right. And then when she gets there, it says that she's trembling with fear and she tells him the whole truth. So we don't know exactly what she says, but we know she spills a lot of information about a really hard past and a shameful past. And then Jesus says, daughter.
Oh, it's got chills.
That word is a claiming of her. And it is a claiming of her as a beloved child. It's in the context of Jairus, who is a synagogue ruler who has come to Jesus right immediately. I mean, Jairus is standing there and Jairus has come to Jesus on behalf of his daughter. Yeah. So this man is begging Jesus for help out of love for his daughter. So when Jesus calls this woman daughter, he's saying, this is how beloved you are. So that's what I mean by restored to self, right? Like there's a sense of an integrated restoration, mind, body, spirit, but also being restored to a sense of ourselves as the beloved.
Oh, I just want everyone to get this book. Please, oh my gosh, I'm going to pour over it. I'm taking it on the plane when I fly out of here on Sunday. And I just want everyone to really spend time in what you just said. Daughter. Yeah. We definitely have some guys on here. So I will just say son. Yeah. Right.
No, and I think actually, I mean, this is, I'll say one of the chapters in the book is about the familial language that Jesus uses. And one of the things I learned while researching this book is that Jesus only prays to God as Father and insists that his disciples do the same. Never, not once in the Old Testament is God prayed to as a father. You get an image of God as a father. So true. But never in prayer. And in the New Testament, that's essentially exclusively how Jesus
our
does
Father.
It. It's exactly our Father. That's how you pray. And that is not a patriarchy thing. That is you are part of the family.
Yes.
The same God who is Father is also the one from whom we are born again, right? Like that sense of God as a mother is right there. So the insistence on Father is the insistence on being in a relationship with God where God's primary role is loving parent, not king, judge, ruler, etc. And it doesn't mean that God is not a king or a judge, or those are bad understandings. And yet, if we don't primarily understand God in the role of parent, loving parent, and ourselves as beloved but needy and dependent children, then we're not going to understand who we are. We're not going to understand who God is, and we're not going to be able to participate in that healing work.
It's so true. I was, and I know I need to let you go. When I was looking through 1 John 4 again today, 7 through 21, and I looked at, I know and believe God's love for me. And I took love out again, and then perfect love casts out all fear. And I took out those 2 loves, and they're both agape, of course. And we're well aware that's a brotherly love. It's love, right? It's a familial love. Yeah. But when I started doing my words under the words, which I love to do, it actually can mean love feast. As if you're being invited into a home for sobremesa, for a sitting at the table and feasting.
Right.
And that image was so healing for me today. I just had to add that because I thought, come to the love feast.
Right.
And I would love to know, how are you doing now? How are you doing today physically? Are you still attuned to how important that is? How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm actually, that is part of what has happened for me over the course of these 7 years has been a much greater attunement to the ways in which my emotional and spiritual, the way my body signals emotional and spiritual reality. And so I have noticed, like, even just this past week, my Achilles tendon was tight. And I was kind of like, oh yeah, I walked a lot, which I did. I walked many more miles on Friday than I have in a long time. So I was dismissive of it. Mm-hmm. And thankfully there was just this little prompt to be like, might my body be communicating something to me? So and good. I really was drawn to the idea of being rooted and established in love, like that kind of grounded. Yeah. And I was thinking about how there was this situation just this past week that I was really anxious about. And I was letting that anxiety be my nourishment. And so my Achilles, literally, I was running, I was taking a run and I was like, my Achilles is really tight. And I just prayed that whole run that I would be rooted and established in love and not in fear, not in anxiety. And honestly, like, there was a healing that happened. Oh my goodness. That. And I will say on my website, I do have kind of like what I call body prayers and some examples of how, when we're, feeling tension in our shoulders and necks, how we can bring prayer into our bodies and how we can bring our bodies to God in prayer and allow the things that are going on in our bodies to be indications of a deeper emotional or spiritual reality. And it doesn't always mean, like in my case, within a few hours, my Achilles was better, but that's not always what happens.
No, but I think they're completely related though.
Exactly.
And I appreciate you bringing that to us.
Learn how to pay attention to our bodies and trust that God is present with us in our bodies and that might be leading us into some other ways of understanding. It seems really important to me. And it's something that I practice regularly now with great gratitude.
Beautiful. We will check out those body prayers. You're talking to a dancer, danced my whole life. So movement is very important to me. And I actually was thinking about it a lot today that I want to start adding simple movements of dance because that brought me such joy in my life, probably because I watched Julianne and Derek Huff step into the movies. And I was just like, I miss dancing. But I thank you so much, Amy Julia. And your words are going to be just stay with us and speak to us and help us to live a more meaningful life with a body that embodies us well, right?
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's been really great to talk with you about all of these things. I so appreciate it.
You are so welcome.
Thanks for listening today. It was great having you here. For even more great content and resources, please join the Stronger Everyday online community at JanelleRaridan.com. Always remember, you, my friend, have value, worth, and dignity.